Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to J.E.D.I Aquatics. Once again, my name is Kurt, and we're here for an awesome conversation today, looking at our past and how our past can actually inform our future. So we've got 4 people in here today, all who have a bit of knowledge about Aotearoa New Zealand and how aquatics and water safety was in the past, and all who are involved in shaping it for the future. So what I'm going to do is open it up a bit and ask each of you to introduce yourself in the way you would like, and then we'll carry on the conversation from there. So anybody want to start first?
Okay. Kia ora, Teresa Stanley. I'm the Research and Impact Manager at Drowning Prevention Auckland. Along with Kevin Moran, I was one of the inaugural board members to what was then Water Safe Auckland some 30 years ago. And I jumped ship in around 2000 and became an employee and have been there ever since. Come with a history of swimming, surf lifesaving, and lots of aquatic activities.
Thank you, Teresa. Can we bounce to, I'm just going to go on my screen. If we can bounce to Stacey, please.
Kia ora, my name's Stacey. I guess taking this back a little bit, I was an employee of Water Safe Auckland under Teresa, and when Kevin was a board member. So this was about 10 years ago. I come from a health promotion, injury prevention background, but had a background in surf lifesaving, very heavily involved at a club level and at a regional level. Currently, I am living in Australia, in Sydney, working for Royal Lifesaving. So I've stayed in drowning prevention, and I've gone into a more of a research role, whereas at Water Safe Auckland, I guess I was in more of a practitioner role, working with communities and doing water safety programs, particularly for migrant and refugee communities and youth as well. Now my focus is very much on research, looking at the numbers, who drowns, why they drown, and identifying, evidence base that can inform policy, practice, and research. And Kevin was my supervisor for doing my master's, looking at knowledge, attitudes, and behaviour towards youth knowledge, attitudes, and behaviour for water safety. And I'm currently doing my PhD looking at drowning risk among migrant communities in Australia.
Thank you, Stacey. Lynley, let's go with you next.
Kia ora, I'm Lynley, and I currently work for Drowning Prevention Auckland with Teresa. Have been there for about 10 years. I come from a teaching background, so started my career as a classroom teacher and then moved into teacher education, both working at the university level with pre-service teachers and also at an in-service level in advisory services with practicing teachers in schools. Went overseas for a couple of years and did some teaching in an international school. When I came back, there was a position at what was Water Safe Auckland at the time. Someone had left suddenly and they needed someone to fill in, so I did that for a couple of months and then thought, oh, this is pretty good. I like this type of work, and ended up staying there, and I'm still there. So as a teacher, and in particular when I moved into the tertiary sector and in-service work through advisory, my area was health and physical education. I've always had an interest in that area, always had an interest in aquatics, which goes right, if we're here for looking at the history of aquatics, I can certainly remember my aquatics when I was a pupil in a primary school. So it's interesting, Kurt, that you made that comment about looking at, up to the 80s and things that were done then. Well, if we want to go back even further than that, there are things that aren't new, but obviously there are lots of things that are new. So really interested in this conversation that we're going to have, even though I'm not sure, it's a bit of a mystery tour, but looking forward to it. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you, Lynley. And it is a bit of a mystery tour, which is kind of why we're having the conversation. I'm interested in where it's going to go as well, because I have no idea. Kevin, if you would grace us with the final one.
Thanks, Kurt. Kia ora, everyone. I'm a now retired principal lecturer in physical education at the University of Auckland. I've been a lifeguard on the front line for over 60 years. I still guard at Muriwai Beach on Auckland's west coast. I have a lifelong commitment to education, both as a practitioner, as a teacher, as an ex-swimming coach. I competed in the 1974 Commonwealth Games, which is where my intro to New Zealand came from. I met several coaches, New Zealand swimmers on previous games, and the appeal for New Zealand was its aquatic environment. One of the major driving forces for me currently is to change the concept of drowning prevention education from a learn to swim structure, the traditional way, towards a more inclusive promotion of water competency, which involves not just the psychomotor skills, but also all the background knowledge, cognition, and effective behavior that impacts on drowning risk.
Thank you, Kevin. And you open up with probably one of the biggest issues around with the whole idea of learn to swim versus competency and where all that sits on that spectrum. So I'm sure that will jump into the conversation at some point. But yeah. But just to set the stage a bit, and I think we all have a little bit of coffee. So this is more of a coffee chat. Anybody can jump in when they like, but to give you an idea why I want to have this conversation, and normally I'm looking more at the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, but I think this is an intricate part of that, is understanding where we came from and where we could be going. And my intro to that was working with a group up in Auckland, mainly refugee, African, Middle Eastern descent, and in another project that I was doing. And the person came to me because they knew I was aquatic and basically sent me a document and said, we were doing this program ages ago and now it's gone and we can't restart it. Is there any way that we can actually get this going again? And I look at this document and there's this intricate project on how to approach, do the intervention, basic water safety skills of refugee and migrant communities. And I'm going, this is awesome. Why aren't we doing this? And it just kind of fizzled. So, and that seems to be a trend that I keep seeing over and over again, where projects get launched, people say, yeah, this is going to work. And then all of a sudden it goes away. And then I see people go, oh, we have this great idea. Let's do this. But we did it before and now we're doing it again. So this kind of little merry-go-round that we're going. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have the chat, and maybe just stop there and open up on that thought, because again, this is me coming in. I'm not originally from New Zealand. I didn't have the history, so I'm putting all this together as I go. So first of all, from the room, what do you think about that?
Kurt, I think it's a critical part of the mix that we have in terms of aquatics education in New Zealand. We've got the dynamics of population and demographic change, and that, in my experience, has happened dramatically in the last 2 decades, and has put that sort of pressure on creating specific needs for specific parts of the community, not only in our schools, but also in the community on a wider basis. So a lot of the work that we've been doing, certainly in the Auckland region over the past 2 decades with Water Safe Auckland, now Drowning Prevention Auckland, has to be to address exactly what you're talking about, the cultural diversity and the fact that we have been active in researching this group, these community groups, to try and get some of the answers to the questions which they raise in terms of their education. It's not just Māori, Pacifica, it's now the very disparate groups from Asia, where we just simply can't categorize a group as Asian, because we might be looking at 50 or 60 different regional cultures.
Thank you for saying that. That's one of my things, this whole category of Asian, what is it, 2-point-something billion people, we just lump them into a category. So yes, that's something that I'm often evangelizing about. On the broader topic of kind of this whole idea of ideas coming back again and again, does anybody have any ideas about that as far as things that have been done that would be applicable now?
I think it's going back to a lot of these things, a lot of these projects come from being reactionary, even though, as Kevin said, programs have been going on for a while. Water Safe Auckland was certainly delivering a lot of those, 10 years ago, and still continue to do under Drowning Prevention Auckland. But we certainly see it at the moment, and in Australia, where you might have multiple drownings from a certain community, or you get a lot of media about, it's been such a bad summer. And so all of a sudden there's people saying, well, what are we doing about it? Here is a little bit of money. And so that might provide, a seed program or a pilot program, which is great, but there's no sustainability around that. So I know sort of in the past, certainly there was some funding, and certainly having dedicated people in place that Water Safe Auckland had to deliver and grow some of those programs was fantastic, but unfortunately, not all funders see the value in that. They just want numbers. Yep, we've put 30 people through a Learn to Swim program, or we've put 30 adults or children through a program focusing on water safety skills, which is fantastic, but what happens after that? And so in some way, well, one, it's not sustainable, but also in some ways you're introducing people to the water, which is fantastic, giving them some basic skills, but is that almost putting them at risk because you've got nothing after that as well? So I think a lot of it, unfortunately, does come down to funding and not having that sustainable funding in place. And I think that's an ongoing issue, both here and in Australia as well.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that, Stacey. I think you're absolutely right. Without beating our bandwagon too much, Water Safe Auckland did introduce a number of really innovative research, evidence-based programs responding to need. And I think of Whānau Nui, that was with, a holiday program basically with parents and children in the water. And it was really the first time that concept of teaching the parents to teach the children ongoing had come about. You had the women's water competence, there's the new settler groups, and picking up on that, the West Coast rock-based fishing. So there are a whole bunch of really diverse programs and initiatives. And the only one that has really succeeded in any long-term way is the West Coast rock-based fishing program, because it had council backing the whole way through. So Kev, the number of years, I think we're coming up 20 years. It was 2006. So it's coming up a 20-year program. The others have had a part funding and lost funding after 2 or 3 years, and along with that funding, it's really been the power. Sometimes it's been national government changes with any government funding, but you know, those funding bodies can give it the funding to whatever organisation they want to. So others have looked at these initiatives and picked them up and followed on with them as well. So yeah, the funding is critical, and having a backbone organisation that can actually ensure some sustainability for those the worthwhile initiatives.
I was just going to add something here too, in terms of collaboration. So I think, Teresa, you know, when I'm listening to you talking about, say, particularly the rock fishing project, you know, it is that strong collaboration that can make a difference and commitment, instead of people sort of all competing for funding or whatever. You know, when things are funding dependent, it's really difficult to sustain them over time. And you know, also I think organisational too, there are organisational constraints. So as organisations morph and change over time and priorities alter, that affects it as well. You know, I'm thinking here in particular, you know, the refugee, new settler, ethnic focused programs. Depends on organisational priorities, staffing, hence collaboration becomes really important, I think, maybe.
Another thing I think that is a good example and a case study in many respects of what we're talking about, the dynamics of the problem that we confront in terms of drowning prevention. We had a series of fatalities up in Northland based around crab fishermen putting pots out and just getting swept away or trapped in the pot lines. This created a great deal of angst and concern, but it only evoked a regional or local reaction in terms of support, in terms of safety promotion at a regional level. So there we instigated a whole series of exercises and workshops with the predominantly Filipino and Malay community, because they were the ones who were taking to the waters on the east coast up at Waipu Cove, or the Waipu Cove region. And it kind of illustrates in a way what we're all talking about is that we are reactive because the hook, if you like, into resourcing of educational programs to prevent drowning has to react that way, because there is no constant stream of central government funding. In fact, there's almost the exact opposite. There's very, very little direct funding for specific programs, particularly the ones which reach the culturally diverse nature of Auckland.
Yeah, and I think it's also picking up on that, Kevin, it's around also community needs, which is great, but I guess thinking back, some of those communities, it wasn't a priority, and it's certainly what some of the research I've been doing is when you move to a new country, learning to swim and water safety isn't a priority. There's other settlement priorities, which of course should be, you know, should be the case. But when I guess a community, a newly established community does experience a drowning, that's when people take notice. And I remember a comment from a community that I went to see after a drowning had occurred. And one of the comments was, and it was very emotional. One of the comments was, why didn't we know this beforehand? Or why didn't you come and do this first? And I think that's a really tricky one because one, the community probably wasn't ready for it, or they didn't see it as something they needed to know beforehand. And so it's kind of which one do you do first? Again, it's and it's probably across the board with a lot of communities actually, is, you know, people don't need to hear things or want to hear things until something happens. And that could be across all kind of injury prevention, I think, as well, not just drowning. But that's when the conversations do get quite hard and quite difficult, particularly in a new community where they, you know, they believe them and their family were safe in New Zealand as well, and they don't think that water, you know, maybe posed a risk or that type of thing.
I think one of the things that's been going around in my head quite a bit lately is because I've touched on the entrepreneurial sector in Aotearoa a little bit, more towards the education side than actually doing entrepreneurship. But I find it fascinating, especially in the investor side of things, that people will just sink money into a program until it works. If they think, oh, this has a chance, they'll just keep sinking money and they'll go, yep, this is a startup and the startup's going to chew through money and eventually I'm going to get my outcome. When we come to the nonprofit sector, especially in our world, it's, well, we'll give you a little bit of money and you show us a return and then we'll see whether we give more. And there isn't that entrepreneurial investment mentality. But the fascinating thing for me is that it's the exact same people sitting on the boards. Most usually, the ones that would invest in the one side and for the return are going, oh, well, we're not sure because we have to be careful because this is philanthropic. And I question why the disparity, because it seems like it's the same thing. But why do we look at it in two different ways? And I don't know whether that's a historical aspect and how philanthropy has come through and we look at it differently, or whether it's something different in our value system. I don't know if there are any answers to it, but I just thought I'd throw that out there.
It's interesting though where the funding goes to or which groups it goes to though, when you compare it to drowning risk, isn't it? So, you know, in New Zealand, I think 90% of our drowning is aged 15 and over. Well, I'd probably guess that 90% of the funding is going to 15 and under.
Right.
And you know, when you start to add in the mix around those new to New Zealand people, they're probably not getting a lot of that 10% that's left.
I'm going to jump on that for a second because I want to jump to something, this whole thing of school pools. So I have the ability to look at it from the outside because, again, I only came to Aotearoa about 8 years ago, and most of my aquatic experience is outside of New Zealand. And when I came into this space, this whole thing about school pools is almost like anybody mentions school pools, there's like this, this is who we are kind of thing. And I never quite understood because back in Canada, we didn't have school pools. We had usually an area pool that was within 10 minutes of everywhere, and that's kind of how we did it. And I didn't understand until I read your book, Kevin, because I think half your book is about school pools.
Yeah.
it's this whole, from what, the early 1900s, this whole debate of school pools and funding and governmental intervention, and then more. And again, I've only been through it once, so it's much more, I'm absorbing it, but it really does feel like there's this cultural embedding of, we teach the children and everything will be good. And school pools is like this manifestation of that. If we put the school pool there and we just run all the children through, we'll solve the problem. You know, and everybody keeps going back to that. So I kind of throw that out to the entire group because, again, I don't have that experience in Aotearoa, New Zealand. This whole idea of school pools and exactly what Teresa said, the teaching of the young versus the more broad aspect and how the diversity of Aotearoa has changed. What does that look like going into the future?
I think if you look at it in the historical context, Kurt, and you used the word embedded, it very much was in the post-Second World War period. Exactly that. It was practice which was initiated by enthusiasts, amateur enthusiasts, picked up by advisory teachers in local government, or sorry, in Ministry of Education, and then took off. The pools weren't built by governments, they were built by the local communities. They were given grants of relatively small amounts of dollars to actually build it, but it was their own labor. They had literally formers to actually put the pools in that were built on a cement drying factory in Auckland. And 1,600 of these pools were built around the country by volunteer community neighbours. So the endearment that even this current generation has to the school pool is built around the fact that they were actually a community asset built by the community for the community. Like you, I arrived in New Zealand 50 odd years ago, and being a teacher, physical education teacher, I was amazed by the primary school pools. I thought they were marvelous things, but the reality is now, in the context of modern day, are they still appropriate? If they were appropriate, then the government would have to do it, because we've now got so much government regulation of water space that the local community simply can't afford to meet the health and safety regulations.
I think, growing up, and in the old days when I was growing up, we had our school pool. We got taught swimming, and it was just swimming, but we also had access to the free play that I think broadened that aquatic education. So, Kev mentioned it earlier, that we now understand that we need more than just swimming. And there are those 15 water competencies that we need to teach. So I guess moving forward, the way around that school pool and the old way of teaching swimming is to teach to the 15 water competencies that are recommended for drowning prevention. So we're teaching, all the competencies and linking that with the classroom teaching as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot, even I just think the media too, and different people's reactions to, the drowning stats in New Zealand, etc., all talk about the need for a school pool. The reality is that all our new schools being built do not have pools. So there's going to be more and more schools, not to mention the schools who are closing down pools because they're too expensive to maintain. And a lot of those pools you're talking about, Kev, from back, originally, are all at the stage now where they need, some major work done to them. But it's almost like, calling the government, this is what I'm hearing and seeing on the media, calling the government to task to actually fund them. Well, I think in all reality that isn't going to happen. And is my question I'd pose is the school pool the panacea to the solution? I'm not so sure, as more and more, it's very complicated because there's so many constraints in getting young people, whether they be under 15s or over 15s, to water. The constraints around safety, and probably the biggest one is actually finance. It's really difficult. So, yeah. I don't have the solutions, but I think it's a reality, and I'm just, I keep thinking, Teresa, what you were saying, about all the money that goes into that under 15 age group. It's phenomenal. And, you know, it's all very well if schools have a pool, depending on what the funding is and in what region. They're all different. I know every region has different ways of making these sessions and whatever available to schools and young people. But yeah, so it's almost like rethinking better ways of doing some of this stuff in the school scene.
Yeah, I was thinking about that as well, Lynley, actually. And there's probably just two things I wanted to add in terms of like the school pool was, I guess, a community hub. Where I grew up, my primary school had an outdoor pool. And we're in a sort of a lower socioeconomic area, but it was actually open over the school holidays. So I'm assuming there was someone, a lifeguard, if you will, probably a high school student who had been paid to be there. And parents, and you paid a gold coin donation. Parents could take their kids in the school holidays, or parents could have a key to the school pool as well, which I would imagine in this day and age, the safety aspect probably wouldn't allow for that in terms of increasing access for children who may not, or families who may not have that access to a school pool, you know, and having that environment and that access. So I remember that from, I guess, growing up and having that community hub. But I'm thinking about some of Lynley's comments about moving away from the school pool, or looking at other ways to utilize it in terms of both funding, but not just focusing on children. So whether or not, you know, the school pool could be used for other uses outside of school hours. So whether or not that be family lessons, like what Teresa was talking about with children and their parents, or even for older adults, like water aerobics, those types of things, and looking at more health promotion for the community. We know, I guess, there's lots of health benefits for swimming for all age groups. And so whether or not that would be an incentive for increased funding, or using, you know, the pool more as a broader community asset, which might bring in other partners to fund either the maintenance of pools or new pools as a community asset, not just focusing on children, which is important, definitely, but that broader, you know, for adults, and having the opportunities to increase for the broader community as well.
Yeah, and a lot of that
go
is happening. Sorry, Kurt.
Great.
No, go ahead, Lynley.
Oh,
You're good.
I was going to say, yeah, a lot of that is happening, Stacey.
Oh, good.
When there are what's the word I'm looking for? There are unknowns really around some of the health and safety stuff. Nothing has actually come to the fore yet, where schools have been compelled that you cannot do this without this, and this. And schools still do have some schools still do have key systems, gold coins, or they charge a certain amount for the key for the season. And the responsibility often still lies with the parents themselves to be monitoring it. Yeah, there are some issues. Some schools won't have a bean of it, because if something goes wrong, what's going to happen? Just recently over the summer, one of our local schools in Auckland, who has this this pool that's quite amazing in many ways and some challenging in others. It's deep, quite deep. It was created, the pool, just recently with the intention that it would be a community pool, and for the first time they got that up and running, but they had funding from council to do that, so they supplied them with they organised for them to have lifeguards on duty from a local swim school, you know, and it worked really well. Great summer, so it was well utilised. But yeah, but it's hit and miss, and it's, again, yeah, I think your idea is great. There are kind of challenges and restrictions, I guess, in a lot of schools. Pools are so shallow.
That's true.
It
Yeah.
does limit, it does limit the opportunities that you can do. But yeah,
I would say that's something locally around Tauranga is the access to deep water. And that's something I've been kind of fighting with, because there are quite a few pools that are 3 feet deep. But if you're actually going to go through some of these competence skills, you require water that's deep enough to be able to do them. And we have a precious few. We only have 2 facilities in Tauranga that can actually do proper training in. And one of them are council owned, and we actually can't use that one. So we really only have one. So it's difficult. It's difficult to actually get that access to the water. Of course, you have the ocean. And that's probably the other thing I would add, picking up what Teresa said with that you had that complementary play going on in the past. And that's something I see often with new immigrants. Some of the kids don't have the culture at home where they have that complementary play. So when you see the school come, you see all of these kids that are going, oh, okay, I'm in the life jacket, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And then you see these other kids are just still getting used to touching the water. And that's not because of their historical background. They would have had that access, but here they do not. And you see that disparity, and you have the same program being delivered to this wide disparity of people coming in. But quickly go back to my Canadian experience, because I've had a total of 3 weeks of swim training in my entire life up until the age of about 36. So all of my aquatics background was not formally trained as far as swimming goes, but I spent a lot of time in the ocean, mass fins and snorkel. That's where I learned what I did. But we had, in where I was in Canada, we had this 2-week period where every grade 5 person took out 2 weeks and had swimming lessons for 2 weeks. So instead of trying to spread it over every year we do swimming, every year we do swimming, they said, okay, we're going to pick a year, and we're going to fund that year for every student gets 2 weeks of swimming lessons. So at the very minimum, everybody could float by the time they were done that and get maybe 10 to 15 meters. And I remember some of the kids in the class who couldn't swim got to that point. I'm wondering if that's more of a model, because I kind of see this whole thing of we're spreading ourselves thin, I feel like.
That's certainly
Is
the
that-
model in parts of Australia, in different states. It's a little bit younger. So in New South Wales and ACT, it's year 2 that the children get swimming lessons. And then I guess that's sort of the challenging part of being in Australia. And every state and territory does something different, and have their own funding models and things like that. I think the only argument that we sort of have around that is if you're new to the country, or if you start school after that point in time, you've missed out. And so where do you get the opportunity to learn swimming and water safety skills through the school system, as opposed to going to a commercial or private learn to swim where that costs more money, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time. So I think that would be just one of the challenges, and only having that one point in time, having swimming lessons in the school curriculum, or having the broader swimming and water safety education. Although in parts of Australia as well, that the knowledge is embedded throughout the curriculum as well. But I think from the research that I've done here in Australia, that is one of the challenges, is what about those kids who miss out and don't get that opportunity, and they could be sick or whatever that when that comes around.
It's a good point, Stacey. I think also it's important we don't really know how long this protective factor of lessons lasts for, do we? Because, we've got generally adults are drowning. So there needs to be some regularity in our lifetime. And Kev will push it that, drowning prevention, learning to swim isn't just a one-off. It's a lifelong, it's a process that we have to embed in our whole lifetime. So I think that's the probably, I'm going, Kurt, you're saying, let's do a one-off here. And I'm saying, hey, no, we've got to make it bigger. We've got to expand it. We can't just have a one-off.
So just to correct, no, go ahead, Kevin, then I'll go.
If I could add another note of caution, Teresa's absolutely right. education is a lifelong process, not a product. And the problem with the one-off hit is that you're producing, just like they've done in the United Kingdom, most countries in Europe, where they set a standard. And the standard is 25 meters swimming in the pool. And then once they achieve that standard, the principal, school principal, turns around and says, there we are, we've achieved KPI 1, we don't have to do swimming anymore. And that's happened in dozens and dozens and dozens of places throughout Europe because of this notion that the outcome is a product. Whereas in actual fact, as we found with our research on older adults, is that they need just as much drowning prevention education as the primary school kids, because they've forgotten if they ever did acquire their swimming skill. And it goes back to my concern about the learn to swim is only one part of water competency. All the other associated cognitions and affective behaviors are critical. And that's what drowns people. In all my 60 years of frontline lifeguarding, I have never rescued a non-swimmer. Think about it.
I think as well, Kevin, you made a really good point about, the principal saying, yeah, we've reached this benchmark, 25 meters. In Australia, it's 50 meters. But I know the research that you and Teresa done, and I've done similar research around parent perceptions. So not just kids who learn to swim at school, but those who are in, learn to swim schools. Once your child has been in swimming lessons for a while, and that could be anywhere, from 6 months to 2 years or whatever. But parent perceptions, often they overestimate their child's ability in the water, whether or not that's swimming 25 or 50 meters or 100, and don't really take into consideration about the floating and the treading water and those kind of water safety and survival skills and the competencies that Kevin and Teresa are talking about. So there's certainly a bit of research out there that says that parents tend to overestimate their child's skills, regardless of how they receive that education. So again, it's around increasing that knowledge throughout the lifespan, not just in childhood, but also parents, both their own abilities and their children's abilities as well, and that it's not just about learning to swim freestyle or backstroke.
I agree. And just to jump back really quick to clarify, I wasn't actually saying that we should just instill that as a thing. Because in my case, I went into that program in grade 5 in Canada already being able to swim because I had spent a couple of years in the Caribbean and we're just paddling around all the time. So I had learned basically on my own with help, obviously, but not in anything formalized. And then after that, I continued to have that exposure over the years and then getting into my scuba stuff. And then, but again, no formalized learn to swim training. All of my styles and strokes I developed on my own and then got corrected at the age of 36 because I was doing my instructor training. So I agree completely that it has to be embedded as part of your culture that you have contact with the water, is where I'm kind of coming from with it. I am really conscious that we're running out of time. And I think this conversation can go on a lot longer, which often happens in this. So I was going to throw out a couple other questions, but I'm wondering whether I should just open it up to any thoughts and ideas that all of you want to bring up of what you think is important, connecting under this theme of looking at what we've done in the past and what we kind of need to reinstill in the future. Like in my mind, I have these ideas reading your book, Kevin, about CPR first aid training. That seemed to be an embedded part of everything up until a point, and all of a sudden it disappeared. I feel like the idea of learn to swim. What strokes should we be teaching? What are the safest things to teach as opposed to competition swimming? All these ideas are in my head, but I want to open it up to all of you, and because you have that breadth of knowledge, what do you see as a future? What should we be reaching back and going, hey, let's kind of pick this up again. Let's take a look at this. We already had it. let's embed this into what we're doing for the future.
I think what's important with some of these community programs in particular is that it's about working with the community, as opposed to always being top down. There's a problem, we need to fix it. Let's go in with a program that we've already got, or that's worked really well in the past. Like let's do it again with this particular community. I spent a lot of time working with communities, sitting down and understanding what their needs were. A lot of the time, I think the success of some of these programs does come down to building trust and building relationships within community as well. Because I guess, as we all know, a lot of organizations come in and out. There might be one program, or maybe there's something that's promised and it never sort of it's never kind of seen through for whatever reason, whether or not that be a reduction of money or different priorities or those sorts of things. So I do think when we talk about sustainability, yes, particularly if we've got a limited amount of funding, ideally it would be nice if the community did take ownership of it, or they had empowerment to continue on, after their initial program, they were empowered to then take their families and their communities to the local swimming pool, or they had that knowledge to be safe at the beach or wherever they take their families. So I think that's really important, is not just assuming what communities need and what they want. I think that's a really big part. And I do believe that is the success of some of the programs that Teresa mentioned earlier on as well. And some of those programs still do exist to a certain degree, perhaps not in the same way in which they started, but certainly those long-term relationships, I think, are really important to build trust. And then, so the community actually knows what it's all about as well. And also remembering that change doesn't happen overnight. I think that's what a lot of funders think. Yep, we're going to, have 30 people, that's going to, we'll put 30 people through a program, our drowning statistics are going to change this summer. But it's a long-term process. And I think the West Coast Rock Fishing Project that both Kevin and Teresa have been involved with for a long time with the partners, that actually is a really good example of change over time.
I look at
support, isn't it? Sorry, Teresa. I just think, that this whole thing of this top down, how many of us are actually doing that? We're initiating what we think that the group, the community actually need, and then we're going to get the funding, and everything is kind of created and designed around what we think is the most important, rather than actually working alongside the communities. It just comes to mind with some of the ethnic communities that I know, Teresa, that we've tried to engage and had some difficulty in getting those people, and I agree, Stacey, that's what we need to be doing, is putting in time and effort to work with the communities. It is happening in some respects, but
it is challenging. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
I just keep thinking about, some of these really amazing initiatives that have been brought in and then dropped because of funding. And a lot of it is to do with the sector and politics. And, if we could all just get over ourselves and work together, I think there could be some continuity that could lead to a lot more improvement. But I just wanted to mention, in response to the World Drowning Prevention Day, Do One Thing, Drowning Prevention Auckland brought in a Float First initiative. And that's, again, been really well evidenced. And in terms of doing one thing, it kind of makes sense, because if you can keep your airways above water, you're going to do that one thing to give yourself a chance to either be rescued or get yourself to safety. We talk about a lot of people can't float, or they think they can float, but we've tested them, they can't. But then with some really simple messaging about, head back, ears in the water, don't worry about your feet sinking, all those really simple things, then people actually can float. So, you know, that's another thing to think about. Just doing one simple, ensuring that people can float.
Yeah, not making it complicated, simple messages that everyone can understand.
Cool. Yeah, I do have one story that goes on from Teresa's, but Kevin, do you have anything that you wanted to add to that or thoughts?
I
I
think
can see you thinking.
the critical change that needs to happen is that we, and I mean we, not just as educators or as experts, but we, the community, need to broaden our horizons from simply learn to swim, because unfortunately that is persisting. And the problems that I see on the front line are the fact that people underestimate the risk and overestimate their ability. I've called that the twin towers of drowning. And that is the reason why 80%, 90% of our drowning fatalities worldwide, not just New Zealand, are male, because it's a male disease. So if we're going to target drowning reduction, I think we need to be thinking a lot smarter about why people drown, not how they drown. And the notion that they drown because they can't swim is a real restriction on our thought and our education. So we need to get around the people's heads that competency is about applying skill in a variety of real situations. Kurt, you mentioned that you learned to swim in the open water. So did I. I never went near a pool, even though I was an international swimmer. I didn't go near a pool till I was 14. So it to me, it's that connection with the environment that is got to become foremost in our people drown in open water. They don't drown, they do to some extent, but they don't drown generally in closed environments. They do in Japan in bathrooms, they do in pools in a lot of the European countries. But for the rest of us, it happens in open water. So we've got to, I think, embrace that whole idea in our lifelong process of drowning prevention.
Great. I want to share a quick story. And Stacey, I don't know if you caught the presentation at Welcoming Australia, the symposium that went on over there with Sarah Scares and her story.
I'm familiar with Aqua English. Yeah.
With Aqua English. So
yes,
her story, just really, really quickly, with their delivery, they had an individual who was an adult from India, did one swimming lesson. I think it was an hour and a half. And their goal was just get her to float, just get her to float. And they achieved that in the hour and a half. That individual went on a vacation to India and ended up being in a boat that overturned. She was the only survivor. Now, that's a win, apart from the fact that that person's family actually drowned. And they were on the list for the program coming up in Australia. And the impact of that was that realization of what do we really need to teach? And how do we get to that safer part as soon as possible? And I feel like we're kind of skirting around that kind of issue. And what we're talking about is, if our goal is to make people safer, are we designing everything on that trajectory? So I just want to share that because I feel like that was kind of, we were hovering around that kind of theme, as it were. And I know there's a lot of nuance and a lot of things around that and politics and all of this kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, if we can actually focus in on what we're actually trying to do, we might be able to get there. So I'm gonna do a quick, because we are over time, and I really appreciate your time, all of you, for being here, and I've enjoyed the conversation. I'm just gonna open it up to each of you if you have anything else to say or add, or something you felt that was unsaid, now's the time.
I'll add one quick anecdote, Kurt, if I may.
Absolutely.
On our last patrol, less than a month ago, we rescued a elderly Asian lady in a 10-foot, 2.5-meter swell in the water, going into the head of a rip, wearing floaties and her glasses and a hoodie. And literally within 20 seconds of seeing her, and I have a photograph of it, we were pulling her out of the water. It took us 20 minutes to get her out of the bottom of the IRB. She was so terrified. So sadly, we've still got a long way to go. And as someone who's been engaged all my life in it, I can say we have to keep on going. There has to be ways that we solve this problem.
Thank you. Anybody else? Not a requirement.
No, I think your point around, and also Kevin as well, around all environments, like the media over summer here in Australia picked up a lot of beach drownings, which they're incredibly tragic, particularly of people who go and rescue others and children who drown. But I think what it does is focus too much on being safe in and around beach environments. And sometimes that means that being safe around other environments isn't taken as seriously. So for inland waterways here in Australia, that is also a big concern for us, because inland locations are actually the leading location for drowning in Australia, with so many regional communities. They go to their local swimming hole or river or whatever it might be. And unfortunately, we've had a couple of drowning deaths over summer as well, of adults in swimming pools. And so I think what we really need to make sure that people are aware of is that, you know, drowning can happen in any environment at any time. And so it's about being safe and knowing what to do, and being able to transfer that knowledge and skills wherever you may be. So I think that's really important.
Agreed.
Yeah, I've just been pondering on your question, Kurt, about what do we need to teach. I often think of a lot of what is going on as a bit of a smorgasbord rather than being more focused. So I like that, to think more about that. But I also think about okay, not just the what, but how do we teach this, or how do we get this across? So, you know, there's a multiple different ways of doing it. It's not just the practical, you know, in the wood, in the classroom. It's all the other bits that are really important, and especially now in this day and age of media. I'm not talking about the reporting media, you know, our use of media to get across the messages. And the other thing is where is the best place to teach this? And I'm really starting to ponder on that as I see more, see different things happening, what we're doing as an organization. So yeah, that's my closing thought.
Thank you.
Probably mine is just that we recognize that drowning is complex, and the answer isn't going to be simple, unfortunately.
Cool. Thank you all so much for this, and lots to take away and think about, and we've only scratched the surface, obviously. But again, I want to acknowledge the wisdom that we have on the screen. A lot of years, a lot of experience, and a lot of knowledge all kind of coming together, and maybe we need more of this. There's a little bit more sharing and putting it out there so we can actually come up with the solutions we need for the future. So thank you very much, and have an awesome day.
Thank you, Kurt. Lovely to see everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt.